It's March 30th, 1964, and the great British public is shaken out of its bank holiday slumber by alarming news. Headlines describe how Clacton, a small resort on the east coast, has been torn apart over Easter by marauding, violent youths.
Some fights are justifiable, are they?
Oh, yes. There's just no other way out except fighting.
This was Britain's first introduction to the presence of two warring factions, the Mods and the Rockers. It proved just the beginning. Trouble flared again at Whitsun, the late spring bank holiday. This time in Brighton, Margate and Bournemouth. And continued throughout the summer as other towns witnessed similar skirmishes.
It became pretty more than violent. It became quite frightening, actually.
It fascinated the media, appalled the establishment.
If it were possible to disqualify them from driving these scooters or motorbikes.
And troubled an older generation.
The police done everything possible to stop this damage and the ill-mannered behaviour on the part of these hoodlums that come here.
Could this really be happening in England?
They were doing it on the beaches that only 20 years earlier Churchill had sworn to defend. Why would you do that?
But everything wasn't quite as it seemed.
We're talking about £513 worth of damage. It's not much more than they would expect on any bank holiday.
So what really happened? Who were these folk devils?
We were all little devils in that time.
We turned the world upside down by bringing colour into everybody's life and music.
And I just felt we're taking over the world. You know, we're taking over the world.
And why were they seen to be such a threat to society? Back at the start of 1964, in a BBC documentary about the changing nature of South London, a teenage interviewee described how he felt part of a divided generation.
So I think teenagers come into three categories. There's mods, there's rockers and there's in-betweens. I reckon a rocker, fella runs around in a leather jacket, boots and a pair of jeans. He does what he likes, when he likes and how he likes. A mod, well, comes up, wears a suit, wears a tie, wears a collar, latest hairstyle, latest fashions, goes to the latest dancing, learns the latest dancing, just likes to be modern, a mod.
Although their differences were about to become infamous, both groups were born out of a particularly optimistic time in British history, especially if you were young. They were the first baby boomers, who became teenagers in the late 50s and early 60s, just as the economy was gearing up after years of post-war austerity.
Ladies' hats, coats and dresses on your right, baby wear children's row on your left, shoes straight across.
And as young people came to the forefront of this new consumer boom, they quickly became the object of media fascination.
And how much do you spend a week?
Spend, well, at the most it's usually about £1, 30 shillings.
What does that go on?
That's it, I take the girl to the pictures or go out for a dance or anything. If I see anything I like, I buy it for my clothes.
How much spending money in the week do you get?
About £1.
And what's it go on?
Dancing mostly. There was a piece of market research produced in the late 50s by Mark Abrams, and his research purported to show that young people's spending power, he claimed, had grown by about 100%, representing a figure of something in the order of £580 million per year.
This teenage spending spree helped create the stirrings of a brand new youth subculture, the mods.
Couldn't wait to get out of school. On the very last day of school, we just all threw away the uniforms, and on the very next day, I was a mod.
At first, they were few in number and still to be properly defined as a group. But what they had in common was an almost compulsive desire to embrace the new and to stand out from the crowd.
In 1960, I had my 13th birthday, and it was like the sun had come up. It was a completely new decade, and there were so many new things coming out. Something happened inside my head and everything changed.
This aspirational group were rapidly turning their backs on British working class tradition and instead looking for inspiration from America and Europe.
I loved the Italian and French fashion. That was like the look I was, always like making up. And then when I met Del, he liked the same thing, so we were doing that together. People used to say, "What's this look that you're wearing?" And we said, "Oh, well, it's the continental look, so we're the continentalists." After a while, more and more people sort of were getting that sort of Italian-French look, and then it became the mod look.
You've seen a new look, and you've heard a new sound. Now the continental walk is in your town. Let's do the continental walk. Get up, everybody.
But these young stylists were constantly battling against a clothing trade that had yet to really move on since the war.
There are only suits that you could see around Britain time with a D-mob suit. Really grey and baggy and almost like sack-like. And they would see in these magazines from Italy these beautiful, crisp, lightweight suits in like linen or like a mohair, and it just looked so glamorous.
Hey, you're looking good, baby. I want you to know.
We'd go see French films in cinemas. We'd look at the clothes, get some ideas of what to do, and then find an English copy.
People would often, in the early days, go to Burton's, and they were very much an old person's stuck-in-the-mud, regimented tailoring business. So when you got young people in asking for, right, I want a certain cut with no turn-ups, for instance, it was a shock. They couldn't believe that people didn't want turn-ups. There's even tales of some said they don't want lapels, and sometimes they were even refused.
Until this time, getting a suit made had been largely the preserve of the older middle or upper class gent. But this new style-conscious group weren't about to settle for off-the-peg blandness.
I was making all of my clothes, and Del was designing his suits, and then I'd sketch them for him. And then we'd head off to Birmingham and we'd go to Hepworth's, the tailors, and he'd have them all made to measure. It was really important to look individual.
Come on, let me show you where it's at. Come on, let me show you where it's at. Come on.
To keep ahead of the game, early mods took any opportunity they could to acquire a new look.
Well, you just went to a bowling alley out of London. You wore their shoes, the bowling shoes. So I thought, they look really good. So next time we went, we took a pair of old trainers each, put them on, and I got mine home in the wrong size. And suddenly, everybody's down bowling alleys nicking the shoes.
Now you take Sally, and I'll take Sue, and we're gonna rock away all night.
Style was central to the mod world, but it was about more than simply the cut of your clothes. It was a whole way of life and a departure from the past.
It was a look. It was a feeling. It was freedom to a certain extent, and it was rebellion.
I think my look was very unusual at the time, especially in the area where I lived, because everybody really was wearing much the same clothes, really, as their mothers had worn. And my mother used to hate it. She used to say, "When are you going to get some normal clothes?"
One mod said, we were trying to get away from the council estates, the pits and the factories, all that cloth-capped bullshit. In other words, it was a different way of being working class.
But at the same time, there was another group of working class youth loudly asserting themselves. The rockers.
Well, let an evil lie, so you say, but I'll hide from the devil on judgment day. You say, I'm a little riding man. I'm a little riding man. I'm a little riding man down the line.
Sort of Race with the Devil, Gene Vincent. We were all little devils in that time.
With a fine weekend, a powerful motorbike, and a girlfriend on the back, the Ton-Up Boys set off. 2 short days for riding high and fast, to wind and weave, and often to be a menace.
Well, the Ton-Up Boys, those guys were like an era before us. We were a different breed.
Here we are, the start of the picture.
During the 1950s, it was common to use terms like ton-up boys, cafe racers. The term rocker really comes into usage in the early 1960s.
Oh, I got a gal and her name is Jane. All the kids call
We were definitely rockers. You know, just a crowd of kids, you know, having fun.
She jumps, giggles and shouts. Go! Jump, giggles and
Rockers were synonymous with rock and roll music, though surprisingly their name was more mechanical in origin.
The word rocker comes from, you know, the overhead valve system on an engine. The rocker boxes and the rocker arms that work the valves.
The image of the rocker was more rooted in the sort of teenage culture of the 1950s, of the wild one of jeans and leather jackets.
He wore black denim trousers and motorcycle boots and a black leather jacket with an eagle on the back. He had a hopped-up sickle that took off like a gun. That fool was the terror of Highway 101.
We'd all have white silk scarves and we'd wrap them around our arms, and we'd have sea boot socks that we turned over at the top of our boots, and they had to be perfectly white. If you got muck on them, you've got to get them washed. You've got to have a leather jacket, a black Lancer-type leather jacket, preferably.
And so the ones which everybody wanted was the Lewis leathers.
Lewis Leathers was one of the country's oldest motorcycle outfitters, and they were keen to make the most of the growing teenage market.
So in 1956, Lewis Leathers introduced the Bronx jacket. It kind of had the looks of the Marlon Brando jacket from America of the time, although it was actually an update of a 1930s flying jacket that we used to make with the big D pocket, which initially was used for maps. The Bronx had a special features which were not featured on the American jackets of the day. One was the buckle. Instead of being pressed steel or brass like the American ones, we used plastic-coated or often leather-coated buckles when used during a forward riding position, stretched out over the tank. It wouldn't actually scratch the paint on the gas tank. It's a stylish jacket, it fitted well. This was all very important. You don't want a jacket that's going to be too loose on the bike because it balloons, the air gets inside it.